All right.
So remember that I said that the thing that you're trying to reach is the city, right? And this goes back to, well, it goes all the way back to Genesis, right? Abraham looks for a city whose builder and maker, says St. Paul, looks for a city whose builder and maker is God, right? There's definitely this very strong medieval idea, this sense that people had of that our life in this world is a long pilgrimage, or like a long procession, you could say, towards the heavenly city. So Dante sees the city, and he wants to make his way up the hill towards it, and his ascent is barred by three beasts, which he can't overcome. And these beasts are they're the vices, you could say, which plague Italy in general, Florence in particular, and then also Dante's soul as a microcosm. Because we have to remember that the journey Dante is about to go on is actually a journey through himself. You have you have um, you have hell actually within yourself. There's a famous quote from the Desert Fathers about this, right?
Yeah.
Actually, you have hell within yourself. You have paradise actually also can be found within yourself. Not in some kind of like woo-woo, new agey sort of a way, right? But just you have to understand that this is your function as a human being,
Mm.
right? Is to actually contain the entire cosmos kind of in miniature, or like as reflected or reflexively. So the three beasts here are the leopard with a gaudy pelt. And I will just tell you, there are arguments about which one symbolizes which thing. It is a little unclear. Later on in the Cant and in the Inferno, Virgil kind of explains them, and even then, it's a little unclear which one is which. And so, if you read commentaries, and you have to like understand, people knew the Inferno was great, because the comedy was coming out piece by piece, right? So that people knew the comedy was great. Like even during Dante's lifetime, people were already writing commentaries about it.
Mm.
And so the but I will give you the reckoning which makes the most sense to me.
Yeah.
Right, and these are three monsters. The imagery here is probably taken from Book of Jeremiah, chapter 5. And there's the leopard with the gaudy pelt, which seems to me to symbolize luxuria or incontinence. And I should probably explain. We're going to talk about the vices, the classical medieval vices, a little bit later today, and we'll talk a little bit more about luxuria. Luxuria is it is a luxury. It's where we get our word luxury from, but really as a vice, it encompasses a lot of things that most of us would not typically think of connecting, like slothfulness, but then also like other forms of like gluttony, basically anything where you're giving up your self-control,
Mm.
anything where you're giving over your self-control. And like, even like you go to a spa and you get in the hot tub and you luxuriate. Like, what do we mean by that? We mean that you're forgetting about everything, you're forgetting yourself, you're kind of dying a little bit, and you are just allowing yourself to just feel things, right? That's what luxuria is. It's appetite, yes. It's materialism, yes. Those are all things that can be a part of it. People are putting things in the chat, but it just connects for the Middle Ages. Yeah, Matt says hedonistic tendencies. It does connect all of those things. Like, but the thing is, like, you could be. It also doesn't connect some things that we would think would be connected. I'll give you a good example. We deal with one kind of sin of lust in this first area of hell, right? Like, which basically adulterers and people, have affairs, and the whole romance of courtly love, all this stuff. So we deal like with one kind of sin of lust, but then uh other kinds of like lust related sins, like sodomy and panderism, those things are treated as actually as a kind of fraud, right? Or actually sodomy is a kind of violence, and then pandering is a kind of fraud. So anyway, those things are handled for Dante kind of very differently. So anyway, is watching reels for 2 hours also luxuria? It's something, Lisa. I don't know what to tell you. Like, it's something. Okay, so then there's the lion, which is violence or wrath. And wrath, and I shouldn't have said violence or wrath. It really should just be violence, because Wrath is actually can be a kind of luxuria. Like if you just lose your temper, right? If you lose control, that's a kind of incontinence. Violence for Dante is really something really more specific than that. And there are ways to be violent that don't just involve striking someone, right? There are ways to be violent against nature. There are ways to be violent against God, and so on. And then the she-wolf, who I think symbolizes fraud and betrayal. And this is partly because fraud and betrayal are the worst kinds of sin in Dante's scheme. And this is the main thing he can't get past. And this is the main thing he's hoping the Greyhound is going to come and eradicate for us. So I think we got some art of the beasts.
Yeah. Let's and so this is from William Blake. And so as we look at this, I want to mention, there are a few artists that have taken up the comedy in different, kind of gone through the comedy and done illustrations. Those that are worth mentioning is, of course, Gustave Doré, which we saw at the beginning, the first slide. When you see those engravings, those are done by Gustave Doré. He did an amazing job, and also several engravings per canto. I mean, there's I don't know how many there are, but there's quite a bit. It's definitely worth looking at. You'll see some of those in here. William Blake did a more surreal and kind of more fantastical, let's say, rendition of and so we're going to have images from him as well, but we'll also have some images from Botticelli and some actually even earlier kind of almost manuscript illuminations. And so one of the things I want to talk about in terms of the beast is, the idea that, first of all, the first thing is that we know that we experience this when we try to get ourselves out of a rut. Like everybody has that experience, and it's not even always a moral thing. It's like every time you try to move out of a kind of chaotic state into a more focused or disciplined state, you're going to face your own passions, your own hungers, your things in you that are stopping you from moving forward, but also obstacles of the outside world. So there's a mix of inner and outer aspects. And so in some ways, the fact that Dante doesn't tell us what the beasts are, they are just they do. I do believe that they probably do represent specific passions, but they also represent obstacles in general that come at you when you try to move out of a chaotic state. Dante has his image is quite wonderful. Before he encounters the beast, he talks about a swimmer that goes through the water, right? And is out of breath. And so all this image of death and coming underwater and laying on the bank of the water, and then finally has the courage to lift himself up. He steps up, sees the hill, move towards it, and immediately you have these passions, these obstacles that come at him. And so Richard talked about how the beasts are possibly taken from Jeremiah 5. I think definitely there are, because in Jeremiah 5, what they represent is the state of alienation itself.
Peter asks, is luxuria something like the suppression of the conscience? It's more like the abandonment of it. It's turning it off. So this is going to be, for Dante, these would be the sins of incontinence, that is lack of self-control. We're going to say more about that in a minute.
But there's also, it's important, by the way, you'll see as we go through the comedy, you'll see that there's a reference to memory that happens at several times in the comedy. Even in the first canto, I didn't point it out, but there's this reference to memory, and you're going to see it happen later in the Inferno, even in the ones, the cantos we're reading now. And that's what, so like luxuria is loss of memory.
That's right.
It's forgetting yourself. And it's like, it's a lack of attention. It's distraction. It's all these things. And so it's like you kind of forget yourself, and then you act in all these things. And then everybody who sinned knows that. It's like you have some, especially sins of those kinds of passions. Once you've gone through that, then you wake up and you're like, what? Why did I do that? Like, why did I drink 5 beers? Or why did I eat the second piece of cake? Or why did I watch this? Or why did I? And then you're like, oh, okay. And it's like wakes you up. But it's like that's luxuria. It's like that you forget yourself.
This is the sin of the, like what it's related to the sin of acedia and the idea of the noonday demon, the idea of the noonday devil. That's one form that it takes. And it's you could just say, like, it's the slump that hits you probably right about now if you're on Central Time. Like lunch is hitting, coffee's wearing off, you get Richard's droning on and on about Latin or something, and you're kind of like starting to doze off, right? Like that's That's like a little bit of forgetting about, you know, who you are and what you're supposed to be doing today.